Hello, I'm Dan Ridley-Ellis from the Centre for Wood Science and Technology at Edinburgh Napier University, and I'm very happy to have been invited to give this brief update on what I think is in store for the future of forests and timber. Now, prediction is notoriously difficult, especially when what you're trying to predict is the future, but one handy trick is to start in the past, because then a lot of the future has already happened and been helpfully written down by the kind of people who keep diaries. So let's begin with diarist John Evelyn, who wrote about 300 years ago that, since it is certain and demonstrable that all arts and artisans whatsoever must fail and cease if there were no timber and wood in a nation, for he that shall take his pen and begin to set down what art, mystery, or trade belong any way to human life could be maintained and exercised without wood, will quickly find that I speak no paradox. I say that when this shall be well considered, it will appear that we had better be without gold than without timber. Now clearly I'm speaking to an audience that will be nodding sagely to the words of this very famous forestry figure, but I'm not quite sure yet where we have got to the real pith of the matter. So I'm going to share with you my current favourite quote, which is, "The lack of wood once again becomes the big issue in Britain." I'll pause for a moment to let you think about what time period this quote might be about. So yes, it could well be describing today, but of course that would not be fun to put into a presentation. The answer is that these are words from a paper about Neanderthal survival skills in Doggerland some 60,000 years ago. So yes, trees and timber have been vital to the core of our human existence. That much has not changed in all this time. But perhaps as our lives have become more comfortable and more modern, we have lost sight of some of this. So a more usual talk from a wood scientist about the future of forests and timber might be all about the new technologies and the fancy innovations, and there are many that I could talk about, but you can find that kind of presentation in other places. I want to look at this in a different way. I want to look at the things that really matter to all of us, and I will list them as food, clothing, shelter, energy, health, and stuff. Now, when I gave my talk at the excellent ICF Innovation for Change conference back in 2018, I said that I was a bit concerned that some people were talking about wood as if renewable meant the same thing as infinite, and that all the wood that grows is the kind of wood that we want. I said that at any given time we only have what's available to us, and that we can no more go back in time a few decades to plant more trees than we can go back a few 100 million years and put more coal in the ground. I think I said that we are kidding ourselves if we think that basic wood products will always remain cheap and available, because markets are global, and when global demand rises, it will not be so easy for us to compete for those imports, even when we do have the money. I was wrong, I guess, about the timescale, because I thought we would have more time to prepare, but the various things that have happened in the last year or two and brought some of these shortages, particularly for construction products, I do not think are a one-off, but rather a glimpse of a future where we will have to get used to that sort of thing. And while it is great to see more people talking about the challenges of climate change and carbon and of the ecological collapse and the need to help the natural world, I don't think we talk yet enough about the other big challenge, the supply of materials. We do have the words, and we can say that we aspire to a more circular, bio-based economy, and we can, rightly, point to forests as being the core of that, but I still don't think yet that we have a full measure of the scale of the challenge. Personally, I'm also concerned that we now often talk about forests and trees as carbon sinks, as if that was the only thing that we needed. It seems a bit like saying that the best way of growing potatoes is for carbon sequestration, and therefore we should never dig them up, and then of course we don't get to eat any potatoes ever, and that would be sad, no potatoes. So a moment to reflect on the current direction of things. We have an ageing population in the UK and in other countries. People are living longer, and that's good for them, well done. But that brings new demands and particularly changing needs for the buildings that people live in. And buildings are a huge part of our materials and energy use. And even though recycling has hugely improved in recent years, especially wood recycling, there is still a massive source of waste, and they don't always last very long when they're not the right kind of building and can't be adapted. This is alongside an increasing trend for urbanisation, although perhaps now that distance working has come to all of us much faster than we could have ever imagined, we'll see a drift back to more rural areas. Either way, this is another change for our buildings and how we use them. Wood is going to have to play an increasing role in new buildings, and not just because of the environmental advantages, but also it will need to play an increasing role in the adaptation of existing buildings to new needs and of improving the quality of the building stock. Given the numbers, the biggest role here for wood is not the fantastic tall cross-laminated timber buildings that get everyone's attention, or even the fast-to-build timber frame houses built in fancy factories to high standards, but the millions of small projects, the retrofit, repair and remodelling, improving our current buildings. And here, yes, many years of wood science is finally coming to fruition with new kinds of wood product, modified and engineered wood that improves the performance, and particularly the durability and the maintenance and the moisture stability. That said, CLT is the thing that's getting everyone excited, and it wouldn't be a talk about the future of timber without showing you some nice images of cross-laminated timber. These are some animations done by my colleagues at Edinburgh Napier University. Educational materials about cross-laminated timber, because one of the key things is the education and training of the new generation of engineers and architects to prepare them for the new world of working with wood. And as we renew our buildings, our cities hopefully become more like forests too. Not just because of the urban trees, surely the best first use of wood in the built environment for all the benefits that they bring, but because as we reuse and we reclaim, the buildings become a useful source of wood too. And then there is climate change, which of course will bring changes to our buildings too, to respond to things like heat and flooding, but of course also bringing significant challenges to the forests, affecting tree growth. And as trees respond as best they can, they change the properties of the wood that they grow. So even the wood of our familiar commercial species will be changing. Plus, of course, there are the things that we want, the advances in forest management and in tree selection and tree breeding, particularly the speeding up of this through the use of genomics. They will add to those changes too. And also because we need to build resilience to pests and diseases and respond to changing public and political priorities for forests as well, we will need to diversify the range of species too. This is something that we have been actively researching at Edinburgh Napier University, but I think overall not yet doing enough because there is still so much left to do, especially for hardwoods, to research their potential and find ways in which they can also contribute to our demand for materials, relieving pressure on what is quite a small basket in which we currently put all of our eggs. And I'd also like to do more work on hardwoods because the testing is interesting. This is sycamore exploding on our testing machine. Don't quite know why it did that, something to do with growth stresses in the tree, I think. But we've been researching different candidate species for potential timber uses, and sycamore is one of the hardwoods that we have on the list, along with birch, and we've done a little bit on beech as well. So yeah, quite fun. And I imagine that you will agree with me that trees need our assistance in coping with some of these pressures. Being fixed in the ground, it's not like they can easily get up and move to a better place, but if we are really honest, neither can we. Not easily anyway. We have roots of sorts. It takes us decades to adapt as well, and we have to be proactive because those changes can come fast. And we have an increasing world population and affluence, and increased living standards and expectations, which of course means more food and more energy and more stuff. Particularly demands for the simple wood-based products that tend to be taken for granted, I'd say imagine how unpleasant things would be if there was a shortage of toilet paper, but thanks to the early days of the pandemic lockdown, we kind of know that now anyway. So with a growing population and growing living standards, that means more energy, more food, more clothes. Energy, yes, we know that wood already plays a major role in that, from the small-scale domestic to bioenergy input into the national grid. But there's also research working on making liquid fuels from the basic chemical components of wood. And since our energy demands are so enormous, this is going to take a lot of wood, even if it still remains a small percentage of the mix. And food, not many people know, but a lot of food ingredients are also manufactured from the basic chemical components of wood. For example, microcrystalline cellulose is widely used as a texturizer and fat substitute. And yes, that means that your mashed potato might actually be partly a forest product. And in the future there will be more of this sort of thing. Again, large volumes and in all of our lives, but not very visible. And that same kind of technology has a lot of applications too in healthcare. But let's not forget the basic fundamental role that a lot of basic forest products have in that too, like latex and tissue paper. And also one thing that was a recent surprise to me, clothing. There is a huge demand for fibre for clothing, some 100 million tonnes of new textile fibres a year. More than half of this currently produced from oil, but we also need to find alternatives for cotton, because that uses large amounts of water in its production. Now already some 6% of clothing fibre is wood-based, but the potential for growth here is significant. So I have some extra credit viewing for you, a very well-made video from VTT covering the latest work in wood science across a surprising range of topics, well worth a look, and this kind of research and more is going on all around the world, exciting time. So really good video, and I fully recommend that you watch it.
In this programme, we'll start by considering the wide range of products that can be sustainably sourced and engineered from the forest, focusing on the vast boreal forests that circle the globe. We'll hear, for example, how the inherent properties of wood can both prevent the spread of pathogens and alleviate the environmental burden of the textile industry. We'll learn how sunlight can be harvested to produce chemical compounds via a process that uses nanocellulose in combination with unicellular algae. We'll explore the potential use of nano-sized lignin particles and how enzymes can be mobilized to produce novel cellulose-derived materials. Finally, we'll examine innovative ways of using biocompatible materials in medical applications, such as internal implants and optical sensors. Our programme will highlight the newly established Boreal Alliance, a collaboration between the Finseries Research Consortium in Finland and the Bioproducts Institute, or BPI, at the University of British Columbia in Canada.
For buildings, check out the new European Bauhaus. Beautiful, sustainable solutions and a really cool mixture of different disciplines and perspectives. And one of our own projects, Infuturewood, which is about how we design and build our timber buildings and what we need to think about to really achieve that circular economy that we're aiming for, more than just build and recycle. So we're making lots of videos and putting them on our website, so hop over there if you're interested in these topics. So in summary, wood is the material of the future. Whatever we do, it has to be. But we always need to remember that renewable is not the same as limitless, and we need to fix our wastefulness. A good place to start is to stop the overspecification, demanding that materials have to be much better than they need to be to do the job, and to stop the unnecessary denigration of the timber that we grow here, which is perfectly fine for many of the things that we currently use imported timber for. The biggest barriers to the better use of wood are the ones in our own heads. And let's start building some love for some of the basic heroes that have been quietly doing a useful job without much thanks, like the chipboard from recycled wood and the humble wooden pallet that pretty much keeps everything in the world moving. They might individually be inexpensive, simple products, but that does not mean that they are not hugely valuable in other ways. And of course we need afforestation in the UK, and while we could never be close to being self-sufficient in wood, we still do have to make better use of what we do grow, because as a general trend, rising global demand for wood will make imports harder to get. And in the future, when we are using wood as the basis for more of our materials and a wider range of things, well, that's going to be more of an issue. And all of this needs planning ahead, not just for the forests and how we manage them, but for what we'll be able to get from them too. We build our future from forests. We build our landscapes, we build our towns and our cities, we build our livelihoods and our culture. But we are always building on a foundation laid by the generations that came before us. And at the very front, finding our path are the foresters.